Imagination, inner monologue, and subtext encompass a very broad and important area for artists. All artists use their imagination in the creation of their work, especially playwrights, who must create a whole imaginary world that we have to live in. Now, there are many different types of images. For instance, when a writer writes, we call this imagery. That is, the images within a text. When we have images in our own mind, we call those personal images. And the actor has to find personal images which are associative, that associate to the imagery in the text. We also have a form of comedic images. That is, if we're doing a very broad farce, we want to see broad farcical images in our mind, such as in a cartoon. There are fantastic images, such as in the genre of fantastic realism or science fiction, horror stories, grotesque. These are all very fantastic. So the images as we see them in our mind need to be a film, as if we were watching a movie in our mind that was similar to the style and genre of the piece that we're working in. Personal images are what we've been working with so far. You see, I want you to see your own life, your own circumstances, right? Then finally, our goal is what's called amalgamate. And that amalgamated, like amalgamated steel, means images that are blended together chemically. They're blended together in your nervous system. And new pathways are formed from the brain through the body, along the nervous system and into the muscles. That's what we want. That's when reincarnation starts to take place. So your personal images melted with the fantastic images or the fantasy images, the images of the playwright, the imaginary images that come into mind just spontaneously. When all those start to melt together, a new image is born, a new film is born, a montage. See, what you want to avoid is just having personal images, because then you're bringing the character and the circumstances down to yourself. When you have a personal image and you see something imaginary, allow the imaginary one just to take you there. And let that one change every night. Let it just see that it's there. Let yourself play and create images in front of the audience. It's the theater of living experience, not the theater of repeating what I did last night. So when that occurs, that amalgamation takes place, that is the beginning of the reincarnative process within your psychophysical instrument. And images are important because they lead us to the revelation of the human soul on stage. Someone seeing your character and understanding their own life because they can identify with what's going on inside of you. Okay? So I'm going to ask Michelle, would you please, with very vivid imagery and any kind of body language you wish to use, please describe someone you saw that you don't know, but that stands out in your imagination. Also watch her body language. Just watch how she uses her body.
I was going to interview shamans in Peru. So I decided to go with the nephew of this shaman that I had met years ago, thinking this the shaman the first time I met was this amazing, powerful man that he basically was able to divine everything that's happened in my life. But he's passed on, and I went back to look for someone at his level. This guy was, instead of like my old guy, he was, the guy that I really liked, he was young and he seemed somewhat connected, but he was very drunk. So it was kind of hard understanding him and talking to him, and I was a little, leery about working with him. But since he was connected to, the great one that I had met, I decided to go with him. So
Can you describe his face for us?
Yes, I am. Very, very. People who grow up in that high altitude, they have that crinkly, weathered, like you see in those old Native American pictures, with the high cheekbones.
Yes.
But really weathered.
Like
skin.
leather.
Like leather. 1 inch is dark, even darkness. They don't get like.
Yeah.
But no, just very colorful. Textile ponchos and hats. They have that little, it's called a chuyo. They have it has a peak to it. It looks like, you know, kind of a cone head hat. And
I bet you that has a
very
spiritual
colorful embroidery. Yeah, well, the shamans have special ones. They're decorated special with these white little stones.
You all see the images,
Every
except his face I only see in spots. And that's something because you didn't really care for him.
In the end, no, I didn't. I'll call it.
Okay. So what do you notice about her eye movements and gesture, even though she's sitting in a chair? Yes, Wendy.
I noticed,
Melinda.
well, a couple things. One was when she was searching for a new image, her eyes shift. And then when she found the image, she was usually directing down there.
To the left.
And then that's when she started describing, is when her eyes were fixed.
Okay, so she searched for images by looking upright, and she accessed memory by looking down left.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, just observing. What else?
Same thing. That's exactly what I saw. I don't know about down left. It was always down.
Down, yeah.
Okay, when we're searching for images, we look down. Very often when we see them. When we're searching, we may look up.
Yeah.
Do images exist in our head?
Where else would they exist?
Yeah.
How does the brain work? Are they just located in, is it like a little file cabinet and they're just in one spot?
Yes.
Not to me. I mean, it depends on what your spiritual beliefs are. To me, the brain is more like a transmitter that accesses things out of somewhere else other than it.
It accesses it through your body?
Yeah, it's like a radio tower pulling the waves from somewhere else.
Well,
Otherwise, if it were held in your brain, every cell in your body changes itself every 7 years. How can you remember things that are older than 7 years old?
Well, that's a good question.
some people say that it's not, you can never think of the brain just as the brain. It's your whole body is the brain, and every cell is the brain. And that we, because of the way we compartmentalize things, have compartmentalized our intelligence here.
Yeah.
But actually, it's complete cellular memory.
And the cells do transmit before they
Yeah.
die. When they produce the next cell, it's identical. Neurophysiologists have seen that we see our images as three-dimensional holograms within the brain, that they occur in the whole brain at the same time. There are different firings in different parts because part of it is the visual image, part of it is the hearing image, part of it is the taste, part of it is the emotional aspect, part of it is associative to another emotion, another experience. So actually there are three-dimensional pictures in our mind. So that means that when we see mental image pictures on stage, we have the best means, the most efficient means of communing with our partners and our audience in what Stanislavski calls the highest goal of communion, spiritual communion. Communion on stage is very important. What it means is mutual influence. Actors must influence one another mutually when they're acting, so that they're not pretending or waiting for their lines to have a reaction, but really listening, really digesting, really truly reacting in the moment organically, as they would in life if they were in those same circumstances. Mutual influence. Now, the highest form of communion, says Stanislavski, is spiritual communion among people. And what he means by this is when the theater is so full of thought, so full of emotion, so full of images, that the audience and the actors are communing almost without words. It's as if they're having an experience which is transcendent to the mundane events going on in the play at the moment. And this is the highest goal of an actor's art, is to transmit the playwright's images and ideas and feelings in a spiritual way. How is this achieved? It's achieved simply through influencing an actor. And our means of influencing one another is very simple. The first is physical, through our body language and our physical actions. The second is verbal, through the words we say, our intonations, and the emotions and feelings behind them. And the third is mental, how we think, and sharing one another's thoughts. When we're in rehearsal, we need to tell our partners when we're off stage what our thoughts are. Or in active analysis, when we go to analyze a play, we'll say all of our thoughts aloud and all our actions aloud so that our partners know exactly what we're thinking. In this way, we will be building a group mind of communion on stage in hopes of involving the audience in that communion when we're performing the play. It is the doorway to communion with other people. Everybody looks up, stunned. Okay, let's do an exercise, a short exercise, and it's very short, just 2 or 3 minutes, that is a practice in communing images, transferring images. I want you to sit and look at your partner. Your partner will have 1 minute to tell you, so let's say that side speaks first, this side speaks second. You have 1 minute to tell me why you want to be an actor, what brings you to acting. And I want you to use your body, use your voice. While we're on this side are watching, we're watching eye movements, we're reading body language. Okay? Ready? Begin.
Well, I want to get to my core, as to get to know myself as
Okay, and let's end it here. Okay, good. Now, on this side, you are going to tell them what they told you with all of your observation, because remember, observation is the second source of our images. First is our own experience, the second is everything we study and observe in life. Okay, now all of you to give them feedback. Now, how can the actor possibly hope to find everything in her personal experience? It's not always possible. Therefore, observation is very important. We have to study, come to understand, and observe imagery. We can do this by going to the movies, reading books, looking at newspaper articles, going to the museums, looking at sculpture, listening to music. Everything becomes part of our personal experience when we make it so. Inner monologue is also very important because inner monologue is our continuous thoughts as the character, and as my teacher Sonia Moore said, once the character stops thinking, the character is dead. Or that is, once you stop thinking as the character is dead. So inner monologue must go on continuously while we're on stage, except when we're speaking. Then we focus on the subtext. And subtext is, you might say, the inner underground reservoir from which action springs. And this is very important because subtext and action are related to what we call the subtext of the body, the body language that underlies our spoken text. And very often there's a collision between the two. Okay. Please bring it to a conclusion. What did you observe?
Who are you asking?
Well, what did you observe about yourself in them, Melinda?
That I'm a very expressionate face, that my face expresses a lot, and that when I leaned forward a lot when I truly was like excited about something that I was expressing, and that so it was kind of more just like the physical way that I presented the information, and that
Right.
you notice my eyes going up there a couple times, but really only keeping the image like once. So not sure what that means.
Very interesting. Anybody else? What did you learn, Jan?
He conveyed quite a lot with, not only with words describing what he was getting from me, that I didn't necessarily tell him. I was talking about, because I was indecisive about exactly what it was, how to answer the question, because it was an immense question to answer. So the indecisions, and then he was doing facial things that were communicating.
Isn't it interesting to have that kind of feedback?
It's very strange.
It is, isn't it? It puts you in a slightly altered state.
But I didn't expect him to get what it was I was saying to him.
Yeah. So we see how we're building the interior monitor and controller and the external monitor and controller, so that we become more aware of how we affect one another and how we are effective. When you are acting on stage, you need to be looking for, not that you have to look in someone's eyes the whole time, that's not natural either. With the camera work, you can do that better than on stage, where you have to turn and project it outwards, to the audience. But you need to really be looking for honest responses. And when you're listening, you need to have honest responses. Now, inner dialogue or inner monologue, whatever you call it, it must always be there when you're not speaking. You don't have it when you're speaking, that's subtext. You have it when you're not speaking, when you're listening. Right now you have an inner dialogue going on. You have it in pauses, and in those pauses, that's where you need to evaluate, gesture. Every pause is the connecting thought between what you've just said and what you're going to say. And the audience needs to be able to read that bridge to the next spoken line. They need to, when you have an ellipses, a ... inner dialogue, inner monologue. Oh yeah. So you need to connect when you have pauses. There can be pauses which you create that are long psychological pauses. There can be zones of silence, like we're going to do in a little while with improvisation. And there can be short pauses. But whenever you're not speaking, you must have inner dialogue, inner monologue. Subtext is basically the meaning of the text under the spoken words. And your subtext is determined by your director. The conductor must orchestrate all the instruments to play harmoniously together. The director of your film coordinates all of the various aspects. And the director in a theater has to coordinate the actors. And it's the director's responsibility to interpret the subtext of the play, its inner meaning. You interpret your subtext to fulfill the objectives of the director, who is fulfilling the purpose of the playwright. If you come up with a subtext that's totally contrary to what your director wants, you're obliged to change it. You can sit down and talk with your director about it if it's appropriate. Some situations it's not. But if it is, you can try to come to a consensus about what you want to bring out and try it. I always let actors do that, but I may not see it right first. But basically, it's the director's responsibility to coordinate and interpret it. Yours to fill it in and bring out your individual interpretation within that. That's where your art comes. That's what your experience colors it. We call this your own theme. But subtext is the subconscious mind of the character. It's not your subconscious. It's what the subconscious mind of the character is. So you need to sometimes write it out, or at least speak it out with your inner monologue.
So you keep track of it, the inner monologue, how would you keep
Yes, I write it down. Although it's no longer necessary to write it all down. But what I still do. Yeah, and then I change it. I write it in pencil in the script. When I'm not speaking, I'm on my little, and sometimes I just, if it's a ellipses, it's just a word. If it's a pause, it might just be a sentence. If it's a long pause, it'll be something more. If I'm listening, I'll write out my inner reactions. And then I'll change them and improve them. As I find new ones in rehearsal, I'll check to see whether or not they're there. And if they're not there, I will go back and correct it. If I have the wrong ones, I'll change. If I have the right ones, I keep them. But I'm always working on it. And I allow new ones to happen to me in the moment. I never become pedantically stuck in what I had. If then something new happens, I go with it. I'm improvising. That's very important, to have that subtext inner monologue be like that. Yes?
How do you allow yourself to listen, or how do you integrate that first idea that you had with actually listening to your partner on stage?
When I go on the stage, I put my first idea second and my partner first. Just like I do with you. Because if I have a script going on in my mind right now, I got to get to subtext of the body, and I only have a minute left on this tape. So I can't, but you're more important than that is. So on stage, you always put your homework aside and you work with what you're given, and you check to see how much of it you can bring into it. It's a preparation. It's not a dictation. So what subtext of the body is your and the character's subconscious mind through muscle memory, projecting a collision between what's really going on in them and what they're saying. Remember that when you figure out your subtext, it must be a collision, a conflict between what's going on in you and what you're saying. That's what, but you hide it usually in the first part of a play, and then it emerges in spurts until finally it comes out as the major conflict between you and the other characters. So subtext is, I'll end on this note, subtext is the spring from which your actions spring forth. Subtext is the inner well, the pond, which is the seedbed for your actions. Your actions come out of your subtext.